A quiet girl boards a plane with an old leather satchel and a future folded inside it. Minutes later, that satchel vanishes into a metal chute and the cabin freezes. Who gets to decide whose work matters in 30,000 feet, or even before the wheels leave the ground? When a senior attendant's cold certainty collides with an 18-year-old's calm resolve, what breaks first, the rule or the bias behind it? If your years of sacrifice were tossed away in a blink, would you fight, or would you fold? And when an unexpected ally steps in, does justice arrive, or only a pause before the real test begins? This is the journey of Imani Brooks, a young black innovator whose voice stays steady while the room tilts against her, who carries a device to clean the oceans and a lesson about dignity that cleans the air around her. Will a single flight rewrite a career, a company, and a conversation far larger than one aisle and one seat number? If you stand with courage and believe respect should not need permission, tap like, share this story, and subscribe to our channel. Take your seat. The doors are closing, and the story is ready for takeoff. The late afternoon sun slanted through the massive glass windows of Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, spilling gold across the polished floor. Imani Brooks adjusted the strap of her old leather satchel, the one she had carried since freshman year. The bag had scratches on its corners and a stubborn brass clasp that needed an extra push to close. But inside, nestled in layers of foam and careful packing, was the reason she had barely slept in a week, the prototype for Project Luminara, her team's answer to ocean microplastics. She moved through the terminal with quiet determination, her sneakers squeaking softly on the floor. Every step carried her closer to Munich, to the Global Youth Innovation Forum, and to a chance at showing the world what she and her friends had built. Ethan Ward, already at the gate, waved when he saw her. He was tall, wiry, his sandy blonde hair falling into his eyes as he tapped away on his laptop. Sofia Ramirez sat beside him, her dark curls pulled into a messy bun, a travel mug clutched between both hands. Sofia was staring out the window at the plane that would take them across the Atlantic, her reflection shimmering in the glass. "You made it." Ethan grinned, standing to take her satchel as if it were treasure. "I wouldn't miss this for anything," Imani replied, though her voice carried a weight they both understood. This wasn't just a trip. It was the culmination of 2 years of late nights, skipped weekends, and moments when quitting had almost seemed easier. The boarding process began, and they lined up in the group assigned to their row. Imani's seat was in business class, a rare upgrade offered by the forum organizers, and she felt a flicker of gratitude. She had read enough about long-haul flights to know how much this would help her arrive ready to present. Inside the cabin, the hum of air conditioning and the faint scent of leather mixed with something floral from the galley. The seats were wide, the kind you could sink into and almost forget you were flying. Imani slid her satchel under the seat in front of her, keeping her foot lightly against it. Just having it in reach steadied her heartbeat. She was halfway through fastening her seatbelt when she noticed a woman in a crisp navy uniform moving down the aisle. The gold stripes on her sleeve and the tidy twist of blonde hair pinned at the back of her head gave her an air of authority. This was no ordinary crew member. The name tag read, Marjorie Hale, Senior Flight Attendant. Marjorie's eyes swept over the cabin with practiced control, pausing briefly on Imani's satchel. She stopped. "Ma'am," Marjorie said, her voice polite but firm, "that item will need to be stored in the overhead compartment." "It's delicate," Imani explained. "It contains equipment for a presentation. It's safest right here." Marjorie's lips pressed into a thin line. "Our policy is clear. All larger personal items go overhead." Ethan, seated a row back, leaned forward. It's not just personal. That bag holds Marjorie lifted a hand, cutting him off. Sir, please remain seated. I'm addressing the passenger directly. Her gaze returned to Imani. You will need to comply. A pulse of irritation rose in Imani's chest. She had been taught not to escalate, to keep her tone measured. But there was an undercurrent in Marjorie's voice that scraped against her. It was the kind of tone that assumed authority didn't need reason. I understand the policy, Imani said evenly, but this is specialized equipment. It can't be jostled or stacked under other bags. Marjorie's eyes flickered annoyance. Maybe something else. We make no exceptions for safety, she replied. You'll hand it to me now. Imani hesitated. Her fingers tightened around the strap. The hum of the cabin seemed louder, the passengers around them quieting as if they sensed a shift in the air. Sophia stood from her seat, moving to the aisle. She's telling you it's fragile. That's a reasonable request. Sit down, miss, Marjorie said sharply. I won't repeat myself. Ethan's voice came from behind. You're making a mistake. Marjorie stepped closer, her shadow falling over Imani's lap. Last chance, ma'am. I will take the item now. Every instinct told Imani to refuse, to guard the bag like the precious work it was. But the weight of eyes on her, the tightening grip of authority, pinned her in place. Slowly, she slid the satchel forward. Marjorie's hand closed around it, and without another word, she turned and walked briskly to the front of the cabin. Imani watched in disbelief as the woman reached the service galley, opened a waist-high chute marked Waste Disposal, and dropped the bag inside. The sound a dull, final thud landed in Imani's chest like a blow. The cabin went utterly still. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. Sophia gasped. Ethan pushed out of his seat, only to be stopped by a younger flight attendant who stepped into the aisle. Sir, you need to remain seated. Do you know what she just threw away? Ethan's voice cracked with anger. That's not garbage. Marjorie reappeared, smoothing her uniform as if nothing had happened. She didn't look at Imani, didn't acknowledge the growing murmur among the passengers. Imani's hands trembled in her lap. Years of work, gone in seconds. She tried to form words, but they stuck in her throat. In her mind, she saw late nights under the glow of desk lamps, spreadsheets sprawled across her bed, the first test run of the device in her grandmother's backyard, all of it erased by one careless act. The captain's voice came over the intercom, announcing pre-departure checks, but the words washed over her, meaningless. Her pulse thudded in her ears. She felt Sophia's hand close around hers, warm and steady, but the knot in her chest only tightened. Marjorie passed by again, her expression unreadable, as if the moment had not happened at all. And in that stillness, Imani understood something she had known in theory, but never in the marrow of her bones. Prejudice did not always shout. Sometimes it was cold, quiet, and dressed in uniform. She sat back, the hum of the engines growing louder, the runway lights blinking beyond the window. The flight hadn't even left the ground, but Imani knew nothing about this journey would be ordinary. The seatbelt sign was still lit when Ethan leaned forward again, his voice low but edged with disbelief. Imani, did she really just throw it away? Imani kept her gaze fixed on the seat back in front of her. If she looked at him, she was afraid she might unravel right there. Yes, she said finally, the word tasting like metal in her mouth. Sophia's hand was still on hers, a quiet anchor. We can talk to the captain. There has to be a way to get it back before we take off. Imani wanted to believe her, but she had just watched the most senior crew member on this flight treat her work like trash. How could she expect the rest of them to see it any differently? Marjorie Hale reappeared in the aisle, checking seatbelts and carry-ons with the efficiency of someone who had done this thousands of times. She stopped by a couple in row 3 and helped them with a bag. She smiled at them, warm and professional, as though she had not just gutted another passenger's future minutes earlier. Imani felt heat rise in her chest. She had worked too hard to be reduced to silence, but she also knew her voice could be used against her if she let anger spill over. "Excuse me," she called, her tone steady but carrying enough weight to stop Marjorie mid-step. The older woman turned, that practiced composure still intact. "Yes, ma'am." "You threw away my bag," Imani said, the words measured. "It contains a delicate scientific prototype. You need to retrieve it." Marjorie blinked slowly, as though the request were somehow unreasonable. The item was oversized for storage in that seat area. Policy requires it be removed. That is not policy. Ethan muttered loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. That is you making a choice. Several heads turned. A man across the aisle frowned, glancing between Marjorie and Imani. The quiet hum of the cabin had shifted into something heavier, thicker. Marjorie's expression did not change. "Sir, I need you to remain seated. This conversation is between myself and the passenger involved." Sophia straightened in her seat. "You didn't even check what was in the bag. You didn't listen when she explained. That's not safety protocol. That's disrespect." Marjorie's voice sharpened, though she kept it just below a snap. "Miss, please sit down. We cannot have disruptions before departure." "Disruption," Sophia said, incredulous. "The only disruption is you throwing away something irreplaceable." Imani felt the stares of half the business-class cabin. Every muscle in her body told her to let it go, to avoid making herself the center of a scene that could spiral out of her control. But another voice in her mind, her mother's, whispered, "You cannot always choose the fight, but when the fight chooses you, do not step aside." "I need to speak to the captain," Imani said firmly. Marjorie's lips curled into something close to a smirk. "The captain is occupied with pre-flight duties." "I will make a note of your concern." "A note," Ethan said under his breath, shaking his head. Marjorie began to turn away. But then an unexpected voice cut through the air from the front of the cabin. "Is there an issue here?" A man in a tailored charcoal suit stood in the galley doorway. His presence commanded attention without effort. Silver streaked his dark hair, and behind his glasses, his eyes were sharp and alert. Marjorie's demeanor shifted instantly. "Mr. Drake," she said, her voice softening. "Just a minor matter." A passenger had an oversized personal item, Leonard Drake, regional director for the airline, stepped forward. "And what happened to this item?" Marjorie hesitated. It was placed in disposal due to potential safety concerns. The silence that followed was palpable. Even the distant sounds from the jet bridge seemed to fade. Drake's gaze slid to Imani, his brow furrowing. "Is that accurate?" Imani rose to her feet. Her knees trembled, but her voice was clear. "No, sir. That bag contained a scientific prototype my team built for the Global Youth Innovation Forum in Munich. I explained that it needed to stay with me. She didn't listen. She just took it and threw it away." The man's expression hardened. "Threw it away." He turned back to Marjorie, his tone no longer polite. "You disposed of property without inspection, and without verifying the passenger's statement about its contents." Marjorie's hands clasped in front of her. "Sir, my priority is safety, and mine is ensuring our passengers are treated with basic respect," Drake interrupted. His voice was low, but it carried through the cabin. You will have the ground crew retrieve that bag immediately? Her composure faltered. The ground crew has already begun final checks. Then stop them, Drake said. Each word clipped. Now. Marjorie hesitated, then moved toward the front, pulling a small radio from her belt. Imani exhaled slowly, her heart still hammering. Sophia reached up and squeezed her hand. Ethan caught her eye and mouthed, "We're getting it back." Drake stayed near their row, his posture a wall between Imani and any further interference. "What is your name?" he asked her. "Imani Brooks." Something flickered in his eyes, recognition. Maybe, but he said nothing about it. "Miss Brooks, I will personally see that your item is returned before this aircraft leaves the gate." The cabin murmurs grew louder now, passengers exchanging glances. Some leaned into the aisle for a better view, as if the moment had shifted from discomfort to a rare kind of justice in progress. Marjorie returned a few minutes later, stiff-backed. "The ground crew is retrieving the bag," she said, the words tasting sour. Drake gave a single nod. "Good. You will remain in the galley until further notice." Imani sank back into her seat, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. The hum of the cabin returned, but the air still carried the aftershock of confrontation. She glanced at Ethan and Sophia. Ethan gave her a quiet nod. Sophia's expression was fierce, protective. For the first time since boarding, Imani let herself believe that this might not end in complete loss. But she also knew one thing with absolute certainty: this was far from over. The minutes that followed felt strangely stretched, like time had decided to slow just enough for Imani to hear every sound in the cabin. The rattle of drink carts in the galley, the faint cough from a man in row 7, the steady thump of her own heartbeat against her ribs. Sophia leaned close. "I am so glad Drake showed up when he did. Without him, she'd never have called for the bag." Imani nodded, but kept her eyes forward. Gratitude was there, yes, but so was a sharper feeling, one she could not quite name. Relief and humiliation braided together in her chest. She had needed someone else to step in. She had been powerless in that moment, and it stung. Ethan tapped something on his laptop, his fingers flying over the keys. "I am pulling up the schematics for Luminar and the press release from the forum. If they try anything else, we can prove the importance of this thing in seconds." Across the aisle, a middle-aged woman with silver hair leaned toward Imani. "Honey, I saw everything. That was wrong. You keep your head up." Her voice was soft but steady, a simple human kindness that felt like a small light in a dim room. Before Imani could thank her, the cockpit door opened. Captain Harold Vance stepped into the aisle, his crisp white shirt catching the overhead light. He had the calm bearing of someone used to making decisions that could not be reversed. His eyes went from Drake to Imani, then to the front where Marjorie stood stiffly near the galley. "Is there a problem delaying our departure?" he asked, his voice deep and even. Drake answered before Imani could. There was a serious lapse in crew judgment. "I have ordered the retrieval of a passenger's property from disposal." Vance's brows drew together. "From disposal, correct," Drake said. "A delicate scientific prototype was taken without consent and thrown away. We are correcting that mistake." The captain's gaze flicked to Marjorie. "Senior Hale, is that accurate?" Marjorie's jaw tightened. "It was oversized for the seat area. I followed procedure." "That is not procedure," Vance said quietly, the words edged in steel. "Procedure requires assessing an item before disposal, and it certainly requires consulting the passenger." Marjorie shifted her weight, clearly unused to being challenged so directly in front of passengers. A voice crackled over Drake's radio. "Ground crew here. We've got the item. Bring it up immediately," Drake said. Imani's breath caught. She had imagined this moment in the minutes since it was taken. But now her chest tightened with worry. What if it had been damaged? What if the internal components had shifted when the ground crewman appeared? The cabin seemed to pause. He held the satchel carefully in both hands, as though sensing its importance. It was scuffed. A dark smear along one side where it must have grazed the inside of the chute, but the clasp was still intact. Drake took the bag from him, inspected it briefly, then turned and walked straight to Imani's seat. He crouched so their eyes were level. "It's here," he said, "safe, and you did nothing wrong." Imani reached for it, the leather cool under her palms. She drew it close to her chest, feeling the weight of it like a heartbeat. Her throat tightened. "Thank you," she managed. Sophia let out a long breath. Ethan closed his laptop, the tension in his shoulders finally easing. Drake stood and faced the cabin. "This matter is resolved. We will resume preparations for departure." His tone made it clear the discussion was over. But for Marjorie, it was not over at all. Drake turned to her with the finality of a judge delivering sentence. "Senior Hale, please step into the galley." She obeyed, her steps slower now, each one echoing in the near silence of the cabin. Drake followed her, and though the words of their conversation were too low to hear, the passengers could see the shift in posture. Marjorie's chin dipped, her shoulders, once squared with authority, rounded slightly. When Drake returned alone, he addressed the captain in a low voice. Vance gave a single nod, his face unreadable, and then picked up the intercom to inform the passengers there would be a short delay. Minutes later, 2 uniformed airport security officers appeared at the front of the cabin. They spoke briefly with Drake, then stepped into the galley. The muffled exchange was brief, and then Marjorie emerged, her face pale, her mouth set in a thin line. "Ma'am, will you come with us?" one of the officers asked. She did not answer, just walked toward the exit with the rigid grace of someone determined not to break in front of an audience. Her heels clicked against the floor, each sound marking the unraveling of her authority. Passengers watched in silence, some with pity, others with quiet satisfaction. When the door closed behind her, a collective breath seemed to move through the cabin. Sophia leaned toward Imani, her voice fierce but low. "She'll never do that to anyone again." Imani managed a small smile, though inside she was still sorting through a swirl of emotions. Part of her felt vindicated. Yes. But another part wondered how many others had been treated this way without someone like Drake to intervene. The new attendant assigned to their section moved with a gentleness that felt almost reverent. She offered drinks, adjusted headrests, and even brought Imani a warm towel without being asked. It was as if the entire crew had decided, consciously or not, to make amends. Imani rested the satchel on her lap for the remainder of the taxi toward the runway. She traced the worn edges of the leather and thought about the people who had stood for her: Ethan, Sophia, the woman across the aisle, even Drake. And she thought about the people who had watched, some silently recording, some choosing to look away. Her father's words came to her then, from a conversation long ago when she had been frustrated about an unfair grade in school. The world won't always give you fairness, Imani, but you can decide whether you will let the unfairness define you, or you will define the way you answer it. As the plane rolled forward, the hum of the engines rising, she tightened her grip on the bag. She had been tested before even leaving the ground, but Munich was still ahead. The Forum was still ahead, and her voice, her work would not be silenced by what had happened in this cabin. She glanced at Ethan and Sophia. They both nodded back at her, an unspoken promise passing between them. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The plane eased away from the gate, the low rumble of the engines filling the cabin. Outside the window, the late Texas sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the tarmac in streaks of orange and gold. Imani leaned back, her fingers resting on the satchel in her lap. The leather was warm now, absorbing the heat from her hands, a steady reminder that her work was still here. Sophia took a slow sip from the glass of water the new attendant had brought, her eyes fixed on Imani. "You know that could have gone very differently." "I know," Imani said quietly. Ethan leaned forward from the row behind. "You didn't just keep your project safe. You made half this cabin realize how wrong she was. People were filming. Imani, this isn't going to stay on this plane." Imani's stomach twisted. She knew what videos like that could do. They could draw outrage, yes, but also invite scrutiny she had never wanted. She had not chosen to be an example. She had just been trying to get to Munich. Her thoughts were interrupted by movement in the aisle. Leonard Drake was making his way back from the cockpit, speaking briefly to the replacement attendant before stopping at Imani's row. He rested one hand on the seat back in front of her, lowering his voice just enough to be heard over the engine hum. "Miss Brooks, I wanted to check in with you before we reach cruising altitude," he said. "Is the prototype intact? I think so." Imani answered, "I won't know for sure until I can open it and test the components." "Do you need space to do that?" he asked. She hesitated. "Not now. It's secure for the moment." He gave a brief nod. "Good. For what it's worth. I'm sorry you experienced this. I've already sent a report to corporate. The crew member's conduct is unacceptable." Sophia's brow lifted. "Is that going to mean anything, or will it just be a file somewhere?" Drake looked at her steadily. "It means there will be consequences. But it also means change only happens if the right people speak up. Today you did." Imani met his gaze. "I didn't feel like I had a choice." "Sometimes that's when our voices matter most," Drake said. His tone was even, but there was a flicker in his eyes that told her he had seen his share of moments like this before. As he stepped away, Imani felt a shift in the air. Drake's presence was more than just managerial authority. It was a reminder that power could be used to protect as well as to harm. But it also left her with a question she could not shake. Why had it taken his arrival to make things right? The plane climbed, the soft chime of the seatbelt sign switching off. The new attendant began service, her smile warm and genuine. Passengers chatted quietly, some glancing at Imani with nods of solidarity. Ethan passed his phone over the seat. "Look," he whispered. A short video was already circulating on social media. The caption read, "Senior flight attendant tosses passenger's bag. Faces immediate consequences." It had been posted by someone in business class and already had thousands of views. Imani's face was in the frame, calm but tense as she spoke to Marjorie. Drake's voice could be heard ordering the bag retrieved. In the comments, strangers were debating the details, but most sided with Imani. Words like injustice, bravery, and unbelievable filled the screen. She handed the phone back. "This wasn't supposed to be about me." "It's not just about you," Ethan said. "It's about how people get treated when they don't fit the picture in someone else's mind." Sophia leaned in. "You have the chance to turn this into something more than a bad day. You could tell the truth about what happened and why it matters." Imani looked out the window. The sky was deepening to a dark blue now. the first stars just beginning to show. She thought about Munich, about standing on a stage in front of experts and innovators. She had planned to talk only about microplastics and marine ecosystems. But now there was another story she might have to tell. A quiet knock against the back of her seat pulled her from her thoughts. She turned to see the silver-haired woman from earlier. "Dear, when you speak in Munich, remember this moment. The way you handled yourself. That's as much a part of your work as whatever's in that bag." Imani managed a small smile. "Thank you." For the next hour, the cabin settled into the rhythm of a long-haul flight. Soft conversation, the clink of cutlery as meals were served, the occasional ding of the call button. Imani kept her satchel on her lap even when she ate, unwilling to let it out of her sight again. She drifted into thought, remembering a conversation with her father the week before she left. They had been in his study, the shelves lined with books and photographs from decades of business travel. "You know the world will test you," he had said, leaning back in his chair. "Sometimes in ways you expect, more often in ways you don't. When it happens, Imani, you will have to decide if you're going to match their anger or hold on to your center." She had asked him then if he had ever been tested like that. He had only smiled, a little sadly, and said, "More than once." Now, replaying those words, she understood them in a way she hadn't before. Somewhere over the Midwest. Leonard Drake returned once more. This time he crouched beside her seat, his expression more measured. "I don't want to intrude," he said, "but I feel I should tell you something. I know your father." Imani's head tilted slightly. "You do?" "We've crossed paths at shareholder meetings. I didn't make the connection until I heard your last name. He's a man I respect a great deal." Imani stayed quiet, unsure if she wanted her father's position to become part of this conversation. "I'm telling you because it means you have influence, whether you choose to use it or not," Drake said. "What happened here today won't disappear. How you respond will decide whether it becomes another bad story or a reason for change." He straightened, gave her a nod, and walked back toward the cockpit. Sophia leaned over. "Sounds like he just handed you the microphone." Imani stared at the back of his suit jacket as he disappeared down the aisle. A microphone, she thought. Maybe. But the question was whether she was ready to speak into it. The cabin lights dimmed as the aircraft leveled off into its long climb. A soft blue glow replaced the bright overheads, casting everything in a calmer hue. The hum of the engine settled into a steady rhythm, the sound that would fill the next 9 hours. Imani adjusted her seat slightly, but her mind refused to settle. The satchel rested safely in her lap, yet she kept a hand on it, her fingers tracing the familiar stitching. She had imagined this flight so many times, rehearsing her presentation in her head, picturing herself arriving in Munich with nothing to distract her from the forum. But now, the memory of what had just happened was etched into her mind like a scar. Ethan leaned forward, speaking low so no one else could hear. "I sent the video to a couple of reporters I know through my uncle. If this blows up, the airline will have to address it." Imani glanced at him. "I didn't ask for that." "I know," Ethan said, "but you can't just let this vanish. If they treat you this way, they'll treat others this way. And not everyone is going to have Leonard Drake walk on board at the perfect moment." Sophia nodded from across the aisle. "He's right. Imani, this isn't just about your bag. It's about the way she looked at you like you didn't belong here." Imani sighed, leaning her head back against the seat. "You think I don't know that I've seen that look before? At school, at competitions, even in grocery stores. But every time, my parents told me to choose my battles. This one, her voice trailed off. This one chose me. Up in the cockpit. Captain Harold Vance sat with his hands resting lightly on the controls, his eyes scanning the instrument panel. The quiet inside the flight deck was a stark contrast to the tension he had left behind in the cabin. "You're going to file that incident report?" he asked without looking away from the altimeter. "Yes." Leonard Drake's voice came from behind him, steady but firm. "This is not the kind of situation we can bury." Vance glanced over his shoulder. "Marjorie's been with the company for over 20 years. She's respected." "And she abused that respect today," Drake said flatly. "Experience doesn't excuse behavior that undermines passenger safety and dignity. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was an act of bias disguised as procedure." Vance let out a slow breath. "I agree she crossed a line, but this is going to ripple through the crew ranks. You know how they close ranks when one of their own gets disciplined in front of passengers." "I'm not here to protect egos," Drake replied. "I'm here to protect the standard of service we claim to have. If the standard doesn't apply equally, then it's just a slogan." Vance gave a small nod, his jaw tightening. "You've got a point." Back in the cabin, the replacement attendant approached Imani with a gentle smile. "Miss Brooks, would you like something to eat now? We have the early dinner service ready." Imani shook her head. "Maybe later." "Thank you." The attendant nodded and moved on. Sophia leaned closer. "Do you think Drake knows your father is a shareholder?" Imani hesitated. "He said he does, but he didn't treat me differently before he found out. He was already standing up for me." "That matters," Ethan said. "Means his reaction was about right and wrong, not just about politics." Imani let out a soft hum of agreement, though a flicker of uncertainty remained. Her mind wandered to the upcoming forum. The stakes there were entirely different, a hall full of scientists, policymakers, and investors waiting to hear ideas that could change the world. Her original plan had been simple: speak about the science, win the grant, and come home. But now another voice whispered in her mind, asking what it would mean to leave this incident unspoken. If she stayed silent, she would keep the focus on the project. If she spoke out, she might risk overshadowing the work with a story about prejudice on a plane. Yet maybe the two stories were connected after all. Her work was about protecting the planet for everyone. And what was the point if not everyone was treated with equal respect? She closed her eyes, feeling the pull of both choices. Up front, Drake finished speaking with Vance and stepped out of the cockpit. Instead of walking back to his seat, he paused near Imani's row. "Miss Brooks," he said quietly, "when we land in Munich, there will be a representative from corporate waiting to speak with you. I'll be there as well." Imani's brows lifted. "Why?" "Because what happened today is going to require more than a formal apology," Drake said. "They need to hear from you directly." "I don't know what I want to say to them yet," she admitted. "That's fine," Drake replied. "You'll have time to decide. But I'll tell you something I've learned in this business. If you don't speak for yourself, someone else will speak for you, and they won't always get it right." With that, he moved down the aisle, leaving her with a thought she could not shake. The rest of the cabin had settled into the quiet of cruise. Passengers pulled blankets over their laps. Screens flickered with movies, and the scent of reheated meals drifted through the air. Yet Imani's mind was anything but still. She imagined walking into the forum's main hall, her slides ready, her teammates seated in the front row. She imagined the moment she might look up from her notes and decide to tell the story of this flight, not to humiliate Marjorie Hale, but to name the truth of what had happened and to show that science and dignity belonged in the same conversation. A part of her resisted the idea. She had worked too long to have her achievement defined by an act of ignorance. But another part felt that the very reason she worked so hard was so that voices like hers could be heard, without being silenced or dismissed. Ethan broke the silence. "Whatever you decide in Munich, we'll back you." Sophia nodded. "Always." Imani looked at both of them. The hum of the engines filled the space between their words. She rested her hand on the satchel again, feeling the outline of the prototype inside. It was still here, and so was she, far ahead. The Atlantic stretched beneath them, unseen in the darkness, carrying them toward a city where decisions would be made, and where she would decide exactly how much of her story the world would hear. The soft glow of the cabin lights made it look almost peaceful, but beneath the surface there was an energy that refused to settle, even with Marjorie gone. The weight of what had happened still lingered in the air, like the faint scent of turbulence before it hits. Imani sat back with her satchel in her lap, staring at the seat pocket in front of her. She had replayed the moment over and over, the dismissive tone, the sound of the bag hitting the bottom of the chute, the rush of helplessness. Now that the danger to her project had passed, the memory of it felt heavier, not lighter. A few rows ahead, Leonard Drake spoke quietly to the replacement attendant. Every now and then his eyes flicked toward Imani, not in scrutiny, but in that deliberate way of someone making sure the center of the storm was still holding steady. Passengers in nearby seats were still whispering to each other. She caught fragments completely uncalled for. "You saw the way she looked at her. I've never seen anyone do that before." Each murmur was a reminder that this wasn't just her story anymore. Sophia leaned over, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're talking about you in the back, too. People want to know your name." "I'm not sure I want them to," Imani replied. Ethan, always ready with the counterpoint, leaned forward. "Too late. That video has legs. It's already on 3 different platforms, and I'm guessing by the time we land, it'll be everywhere." Imani's jaw tightened. "That's exactly why I'm not sure. I didn't plan for any of this, but maybe it planned for you," Sophia said softly. "Sometimes the story chooses the storyteller." Before Imani could answer, Drake approached. His expression was calm, but there was a certain gravity to his presence that made nearby passengers quiet down. "Miss Brooks," he said, "I've just been informed that corporate is preparing an official statement. They've seen the footage." Imani looked up at him, from who Drake gave the faintest hint of a smile. It's hard to say when half the cabin was filming. Ethan grinned faintly, but Imani wasn't in the mood to celebrate. "So what happens now?" "Now," Drake said, "we make sure they hear the truth from you before they try to frame it for themselves." There was something in his voice that told her he understood the stakes. If she stayed quiet, the airline could package the incident as a misunderstanding, a regrettable but small mistake. But if she spoke, the story could take a different shape entirely. "When we land," he continued, "there will be a representative from our Munich office waiting at the gate. They'll want to meet with you immediately." Sophia's eyes widened. "They're not wasting any time." "They can't afford to," Drake said. "This isn't just about one passenger. This is about trust in the brand." Imani met his gaze. "And what if I'm not ready to talk to them?" "Then you tell them that," Drake replied. "But I think you're stronger than you feel right now." With that, he stepped back, giving her space. Dinner service resumed. but Imani barely touched her food. She kept thinking about the moment ahead in Munich, the meeting she hadn't planned for, the questions she hadn't prepared to answer. Ethan broke the silence between them. You could keep it simple. Just tell them exactly what happened. It's not that simple, Imani said. If I do that, I have to decide if I'm going to say why I think it happened. Sophia's gaze softened. You mean you'd have to say it was because you're black? Imani looked down at her hands, still resting on the satchel. I'd have to say I believe that's why she saw me as someone who didn't belong in this seat. With this bag, on this flight? No one spoke for a moment. The hum of the engines filled the space instead. Finally, Ethan said, if you don't say it, someone else will, and they might not say it right. The words echoed what Drake had told her earlier, and she felt that truth settle in her chest. The rest of the flight passed in a haze. She tried to sleep, but couldn't. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the moment the bag disappeared into the chute. She heard the finality in Marjorie's voice. She felt the quiet in the cabin when no one yet knew what would happen next. Hours later, the announcement came that they would begin their descent into Munich. Imani fastened her seatbelt, her stomach tightening not from turbulence, but from the weight of what awaited her. As the wheels touched down, a ripple of relief moved through the passengers. People reached for their phones, their bags, their jackets. Imani stayed seated, the satchel secure at her feet. When the seatbelt sign went off, Drake appeared once again. Miss Brooks, if you'll come with me, we'll head straight to the meeting room. Your friends can wait in the arrivals area. Ethan and Sophia both started to protest, but Imani shook her head. It's okay. I'll be fine. Drake led her off the plane, down the jet bridge, and into the cool, efficient brightness of the terminal. Waiting near the gate was a woman in a tailored gray suit, her dark hair pulled back, a small tablet in her hand. She introduced herself as Annika Vogel, the Munich corporate liaison. Miss Brooks, we appreciate you taking the time to speak with us immediately, Vogel said. Her voice was polite, but there was a tension in her eyes. We'd like to hear directly from you about the incident. They entered a glass-walled conference room near the gate. Vogel gestured for Imani to sit, Drake taking the seat beside her like a silent witness. Imani took a breath. She could feel her heart beating in her throat. This was the moment she had been circling for hours. She began simply, telling them about the bag, about the contents, about the words exchanged. She described the way Marjorie had dismissed her explanation, the way she had been cut off, the moment she saw the bag vanish. And then she paused. Her fingers curled against the edge of the table. I believe she made that decision because she looked at me and decided I didn't belong in that seat with that bag. Imani said, and that's not about safety. That's about bias. The room was silent for a moment. Vogel's eyes didn't waver. Thank you for saying that, she said finally. Drake's presence beside her was steady, like a wall at her back. Vogel nodded, making a note on her tablet. We'll be conducting a full investigation. This will not be minimized. And I want to be clear. Miss Brooks, you will not be asked to stay silent about this. Imani felt something shift inside her, a release of pressure she hadn't realized she was holding. She had said it out loud. She had named it. When the meeting ended, Drake walked her toward the arrivals area where Ethan and Sophia were waiting. As soon as they saw her, they rushed forward, both speaking at once. She held up a hand and smiled faintly. I told them the truth. Sophia's eyes shone. Then you've already won. By the time they left the glass-walled conference room, The sharp edge of adrenaline had faded into something quieter but heavier. Imani walked beside Ethan and Sophia through the terminal, the satchel slung over her shoulder like armor. The sound of rolling suitcases and distant announcements seemed almost muted compared to the intensity of the last few hours. They made their way to the connecting gate for the short hop to Munich City Airport. The boarding process was uneventful, almost strange in its normalcy. A smiling flight attendant welcomed them aboard, her tone genuine, her movements relaxed. Imani felt herself unclench slightly, though she still kept the satchel in her lap after they found their seats. Once airborne, Sophia leaned over, lowering her voice. You did it. You told them exactly what happened. That matters more than you think. Imani stared out at the clouds below, thick and white like stretched cotton. I know it matters. I just don't know if I'm ready for the rest of it. The questions, the attention. People will want to talk about what happened on that plane, instead of what we came here to present. That's the thing, Ethan said from across the aisle. It doesn't have to be one or the other. You can make them see the connection. Imani turned toward him. Connection. He nodded. Your project is about cleaning up the environment for everyone, no matter where they come from or what they look like. What happened to you is about the way the world decides who belongs where. It's all part of the same picture. His words sank in slowly. She had been holding the two experiences in separate boxes in her mind, one labeled science, the other labeled injustice. But maybe they weren't separate after all. As the plane dipped toward Munich, the city came into view, its streets lit like thin gold threads weaving through the dark. Imani felt a flicker of anticipation under the weight she carried. They landed without incident, collected their bags, and took a taxi to the hotel where the forum participants were staying. The lobby buzzed with energy. Young people from around the world gathered in small clusters, sharing ideas and laughter in a mix of languages. At check-in, the receptionist handed Imani her room key and a packet with her schedule. Your presentation is in 2 days, she said. There's an optional networking breakfast tomorrow morning if you'd like to meet some of the other speakers. Upstairs. Imani dropped her bag on the bed and sank into the chair by the window. The city lights reflected in the glass, overlaying her own faint reflection. She could see the outline of the satchel on the bed behind her. Sophia knocked and came in, holding 3 mugs from the cafe downstairs. She handed one to Imani and one to Ethan, who had followed her in. The coffee was strong and fragrant, cutting through the fog of travel. Ethan pulled a chair over. We should run through the presentation tonight. Get it into your muscle memory so you can focus on how you want to tell the story. Imani hesitated. Are you suggesting I include the flight? I'm suggesting you decide now if you're going to, Ethan said. That way, if you do, it won't sound like an afterthought. Sophia sipped her coffee. If you tell it your way, not as a viral clip, but as a moment that proves why your work matters. Imani opened the satchel and carefully lifted out the prototype. It was intact, the smooth casing unmarred, the internal mechanism still aligned. Relief spread through her like a slow tide. She placed it gently on the desk, then opened her laptop. They began to run through the slides, the familiar rhythm of the project details grounding her. Each section was like a step back into the world she had prepared for data on microplastic density, diagrams of filtration modules, before and after photos from early tests. Yet as they worked, her mind kept circling back to the other story. The story of how, less than 24 hours ago, she had been treated as though her work did not matter because she did not fit someone's image of who belonged in a certain seat with a certain kind of bag. Halfway through the run-through, she closed the laptop. I think I am going to tell it. Not in detail, but enough to make the point. Sophia smiled. Good. Ethan leaned back, crossing his arms. Then we practice it until you can say it without losing your place. They stayed up past midnight, rehearsing. Imani spoke the technical details with ease, then shifted into a few lines about the importance of being heard, of protecting ideas and the people who create them. She didn't name Marjorie. She didn't need to. The point was bigger than one person. When they finally stopped, the city was quiet outside, and the only sound was the low hum of the air conditioning. Imani sat on the edge of the bed, the satchel beside her, and felt a steadiness she hadn't had since the moment in Dallas when the bag was taken from her. She thought of her father then, and of what he might say if he were here. Probably something simple, like, "I'm proud of you for telling the truth." And then, in the same breath, make sure they hear the rest of your message too. The next morning, the networking breakfast was a blur of handshakes, name tags, and quick introductions. People were curious about her project, and a few mentioned that they had already seen her name online connected to the airline incident. She kept her answers brief, steering the conversation back to the work whenever she could. But one young man from Kenya leaned in after hearing her presentation preview. "What happened to you? It's happened to a lot of us, in different ways. Saying it out loud here will matter." She nodded, feeling both the weight and the clarity of that truth. Later, as she stood at the window of her hotel room, looking out over the rooftops of Munich, she realized something had shifted. The fear of speaking up was still there, but it no longer felt like a wall. It felt like a gate, one she could choose to open when the moment was right. And the moment was coming soon. The morning of the forum began with the muted gray light of an overcast Munich sky spilling into the hotel room. Imani woke early, her mind already running through lines of her presentation, mentally testing the points where she might weave in her other story. The satchel sat on the desk by the window, the prototype inside like a heartbeat she could hear if she listened closely enough. Downstairs in the lobby, the air was alive with the sound of dozens of languages. Young innovators from every continent filled the space, their name tags swinging as they moved from one conversation to another. Some carried laptops. Others held small prototypes or models in their hands. The atmosphere was electric, a gathering of people who believed they might actually change something in the world. Sophia found Imani near the coffee station, her hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail, her eyes alert. "Ready?" she asked. "As ready as I can be," Imani said. Ethan joined them a moment later, carrying a printed schedule. "Our slot is tomorrow afternoon, main stage, which means today we can listen, get a feel for the crowd, and maybe meet some of the judges before they meet us." They spent the morning in panel discussions, each one tackling a different global challenge. Imani found herself both inspired and unsettled. The problems being discussed were enormous climate change, food insecurity, access to clean water, but so was the determination in the voices of the speakers. Listening to them, she knew the forum was more than a competition. It was a shared declaration that these issues mattered enough to fight for. In the afternoon, they set up their booth in the exhibition hall. Rows of displays filled the space, each showcasing a project that represented years of work. The polished floors reflected the bright lights overhead, and the air buzzed with quiet focus. As Imani and her team adjusted their display, she caught sight of a small group of journalists weaving through the hall. Cameras hung from their necks, notebooks in hand. One of them glanced toward her, recognition flashing in his eyes. He murmured something to the others, and they all began walking her way. She felt her chest tighten. The first reporter smiled politely. "Imani Brooks. I'm Marcus Klein, with the European Science Review. We've heard about your project and also about an incident during your flight here. Would you be willing to talk about both?" Sophia took a step forward. She's here to present her work, not just to talk about what happened on the plane. Imani raised a hand slightly to stop her. "I'll answer briefly." She met the reporter's gaze. "Yes, there was an incident. Yes, it was inappropriate. But the most important thing I have to say right now is about this project. Project Luminar is about restoring the oceans, about making something cleaner and safer for everyone. And that connects to how people treat each other too. We cannot protect the world if we don't also protect each other's dignity." Marcus scribbled notes quickly, then nodded. "Thank you. That's all I needed." After they moved on, Ethan gave her a look. "That was perfect. You kept the focus on the work and still made the point. But inside." Imani still felt the pull between the two stories. She wondered if tomorrow, standing on the main stage, she would be able to balance them as carefully. That evening, the Forum hosted a welcome dinner in a hall with vaulted ceilings and long tables covered in white linen. Candles flickered in glass holders, and the scent of warm bread and roasted vegetables drifted through the air. Imani sat between Sophia and a young engineer from Japan named Kaido. Across the table, a medical student from South Africa was describing a low-cost diagnostic tool she had developed. The conversations moved easily from science to culture to shared challenges, and Imani found herself laughing more than she had in days. Halfway through the meal, an announcement called everyone's attention to the front. One of the forum's organizers welcomed the participants and encouraged them to use their time here, not just to compete, but to collaborate. "The world's problems are too big for one person to solve alone," she said, "but they can be solved if enough people care. And if those people act together." Imani felt the truth of those words settle into her. That was exactly what she wanted to believe, that her work, and the work of the people in this room, could matter beyond the walls of the Forum. After dinner, she returned to her room with Ethan and Sophia for one last run-through of the presentation. The slides were sharp, the prototype ready, but when they reached the point where she had considered mentioning the flight, Imani hesitated again. Sophia noticed. "You're still not sure. Are you?" "I'm sure it happened," Imani said. "I'm sure it was wrong. I'm just still deciding how much space it should take in tomorrow's 10 minutes. Ethan leaned forward. "Then decide it tonight. Because if you wait until you're on stage, you'll either rush it or second-guess it." Imani closed her eyes for a moment. She pictured the cabin, the faces of the passengers, the moment she spoke in that conference room in Munich. She thought about the young man from Kenya at the networking breakfast, about the silver-haired woman on the plane who told her to remember how she handled herself. When she opened her eyes, she said, "I'm going to say it, briefly, without names. But I'm going to make it clear that our work is not separate from the way we're treated when we bring it into the world." Sophia smiled. "Then we'll run it until it's solid." They practiced late into the night. Imani spoke the story in her own rhythm, letting the details flow just enough to set the scene without pulling focus from the science. She ended that section with a single line. "The way we treat each other shapes the future we're all trying to build." By the time they stopped, she felt a new kind of readiness, not the nervous anticipation of performing, but the steadiness of someone who knew what they wanted to say and why. She went to sleep with the satchel on the chair beside the bed, the prototype safe, her words forming a quiet echo in her mind. Tomorrow would be the day she put both stories into the same light. The morning of her presentation. Imani woke before her alarm. The city outside the hotel window was just beginning to stir, streetlights still glowing faintly against the pale dawn. She sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, listening to the faint hum of traffic below. Her satchel rested beside the desk, the weight of it reassuring. Inside was the prototype, ready to prove itself. Ethan knocked on her door just after 7. Breakfast. She nodded, pulling on her blazer and smoothing the fabric over her shoulders. The three of them went down to the dining room, where other participants sat over coffee and plates of fruit. There was a different energy this morning. Conversations were shorter, eyes sharper, as if everyone was guarding their focus. Sophia set a cup of tea in front of Imani. "You slept enough," Imani said. Ethan opened his laptop and ran through the final version of the slides. "Everything's queued. The tech team has our files. All we need to do now is show up and own the room." After breakfast, they walked to the forum's main hall. The building was a blend of glass and steel, sunlight spilling through high windows onto the polished floors. Large banners hung from the ceiling, each bearing the forum's logo and the words "Innovating for a Shared Future." Inside the auditorium, rows of chairs faced a broad stage flanked by 2 large screens. Technicians adjusted microphones and checked lighting, while volunteers guided presenters to a waiting area backstage. Imani's heart beat steadily, but hard. She had spoken in front of people before, but never a room like this. Industry leaders, government representatives, scientists from around the world. Somewhere out there were the judges whose scores would decide the grand prize. Backstage, the air was cooler, quieter. She could hear the muffled voice of the presenter before her, the audience responding with polite applause. A stage manager handed her a small wireless mic and helped clip the transmitter to her waistband. "You're up in 5, he said. Ethan and Sophia stood close on either side. Sophia gave her hand a quick squeeze. "You've got this." When the stage manager signaled, Imani stepped into the wings. The lights from the stage spilled toward her, bright enough to blur the faces in the first few rows. She took one deep breath, adjusted the mic, and walked out. For a heartbeat. The sight of the room pressed against her chest, the hundreds of faces, the quiet expectancy. She found Ethan and Sophia in the front row, their eyes steady on hers. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice carrying through the hall. "My name is Imani Brooks, and I am here to share Project Luminara, a solution to one of the most urgent problems facing our planet, the spread of microplastics in our oceans." She moved through the opening slides, explaining the design, the filtration process, the early field results. Her voice found its rhythm, the cadence she had practiced until it felt natural. The audience leaned in at key moments, jotting notes, nodding at her graphs. Halfway through, she paused. The next slide was not part of the technical section. It was the space she had reserved for the other story. She glanced at her teammates. Sophia gave a tiny nod. "Before I continue," Imani said, "I want to tell you about the journey that brought me here. Not the months of research or the hours of testing, but the literal journey, the flight that brought me to this city." The room went very still. On that flight, she continued, "I experienced a moment where the work in this bag was nearly lost. It was taken from me without consideration, discarded without a question, because someone decided I did not belong in the seat I was in or with the work I carried." She let the words hang for a moment, I'm telling you this because the way we treat each other matters as much as the solutions we create. If we want a future where our oceans are clean, where our air is breathable, where our communities thrive, then we must also build a future where every voice, every idea, and every person is respected enough to be heard. Her gaze swept the room. Project Luminara is about cleaning the world we live in, but it is also about the belief that a cleaner world is one where dignity is not optional. A silence followed, heavier than before. Then she shifted back into the science, moving through the final slides with precision. She described the cost efficiency, the scalability, the partnerships they had already begun to form. When she reached her last point, she closed simply. We are ready to move from prototype to full deployment, and we are ready to work with anyone who believes in protecting the oceans and the people who depend on them. The applause began in the front rows and rolled outward until the entire hall was on its feet. The sound filled the space, echoing off the high ceiling. Imani felt her throat tighten, but she smiled, nodding her thanks. As she stepped off stage, the stage manager whispered, "That was incredible." Ethan and Sophia were waiting just beyond the curtain. Sophia hugged her hard. "You said it exactly right." Ethan grinned. "You owned that room." Imani exhaled, the tension draining from her shoulders. "I'm just glad it's over." But she knew it wasn't. The real work would come in the hours and days ahead. In the conversations her words would spark. Back in the hall, strangers approached her with congratulations, questions, and offers to connect. A delegate from a Pacific Island nation spoke about the threat of plastic to their fisheries. A German investor asked for a meeting to discuss scaling production. And quietly, between handshakes, more than one person leaned in to thank her for speaking about respect alongside innovation. That evening, in the quiet of her hotel room, Imani set the satchel on the desk and unzipped it. She checked the prototype one more time, even though she knew it was fine. It was habit now, a way of reassuring herself that it was still here, still real. She thought about the faces in the audience, the way they had listened when she stepped outside the boundaries of science to talk about something more human. And for the first time since she boarded the plane in Dallas, she felt completely certain that she had made the right choice. The hours after her presentation passed in a blur of conversation and movement. Imani barely had time to breathe before another person stepped forward to speak with her. Some wanted to know more about the technology. Others wanted to share their own stories of being underestimated. She found herself repeating the same words, but each time they carried a different weight depending on who was listening. By the time the final presentations concluded, the hall had grown quieter. The judges retreated to a private room to deliberate. Imani and her team found a table near the back, the three of them leaning over untouched cups of tea. Sophia broke the silence first. "That standing ovation was the loudest I have ever heard in here. If they do not give you the prize, I am going to storm the stage." Ethan smiled faintly. "She is not kidding." Imani shook her head, though her lips curved in a small smile. "The prize is not everything. We came here to share the work." Sophia raised an eyebrow. "It is okay to want both." The wait felt endless. Every few minutes, someone glanced toward the judge's table at the front of the hall, but the seats remained empty. Imani's thoughts wandered, not to the judge's decision, but to the woman on the plane, whose choices had almost derailed this trip. She wondered where Marjorie Hale was now, whether she had replayed the moment in her mind the way Imani had. Finally, the forum's lead organizer returned to the stage. The crowd hushed almost instantly. This year's projects have been some of the most innovative we have ever seen. Choosing a winner was no easy task. But there is one project that stood out not only for its technical excellence, but for the clarity of its vision and the courage of its presenter. Imani felt her stomach tighten. The winner of the Global Youth Innovation Forum's grand prize is Project Luminara, led by Imani Brooks. The sound that followed was a wave applause. Cheers, the scrape of chairs as people stood. Sophia grabbed Imani's arm and pulled her into a hug. Ethan clapped her on the back, grinning. She walked to the stage with steady steps, the lights bright on her face. The organizer handed her the crystal trophy, its edges catching the light in flashes of gold. She thanked the judges, her voice calm, despite the rush of adrenaline in her veins. "This recognition is not just for me," she said. "It is for my team, for the communities this work is meant to serve, and for every young innovator who has been told in ways big and small that they do not belong. We belong. Our ideas belong. And together, we can make the future we imagine." When she stepped off the stage, the applause still ringing in her ears, Leonard Drake was waiting near the side aisle. He gave her a nod that was almost proud. "You did exactly what you came here to do. And a little more," she replied. He handed her a card. "Call me next week. There are people at the airline who need to hear from you directly, and I want to make sure it is on your terms." She tucked the card into her pocket, feeling the weight of what it meant. That evening, a formal dinner celebrated the winners. Imani found herself seated between a marine biologist from New Zealand and an executive from a global environmental foundation. Both spoke enthusiastically about potential collaborations. The biologist offered to connect her with a network of coastal researchers. The executive hinted at funding opportunities that could take Luminara from prototype to large-scale deployment. In quieter moments between courses, people she had never met approached her to say thank you, not just for the project, but for the words she had spoken about respect. A woman from the Caribbean leaned in and said, "I have been in your seat. Different flight, different reason, same feeling. Hearing you say it out loud, it matters. Later, walking back to the hotel through the cool night air." Sophia and Ethan flanked her on either side. The city lights reflected on the wet cobblestones, and somewhere in the distance, a street musician played a soft tune on a violin. Ethan glanced at her. "So, what happens now?" Imani breathed in the crisp air. "We take the meetings. We look for partnerships. And maybe, I talk to the airline. Maybe," Sophia asked. "I want to do it," Imani said. "But I want it to be about more than me. I want them to hear from other people too. This cannot just be a single apology and then back to business." When they reached the hotel, Imani checked her phone. Her inbox was full messages from journalists, from other innovators, from strangers who had seen the video of the flight and then her speech. She scrolled through a few. Some were short and encouraging. Others shared long, personal accounts of similar experiences. One message caught her attention. It was from her father. "Just 5 words, I saw your speech. Proud." She read it twice before putting the phone down. In the quiet of her room, she set the trophy beside the satchel on the desk. They looked strangely alike in that moment, both symbols of the journey, one representing the work she had set out to do, the other representing the obstacles she had not expected but had overcome. She thought about the choice she had made to tell the story of the flight, even briefly, in front of that audience. It had been a risk, but now, holding the trophy in her hands, she knew it had been the right one. The night stretched ahead. But sleep came easier than it had in days. Tomorrow, there would be calls to return, meetings to arrange, maybe even an early start on planning for the future of Luminara. But tonight, she allowed herself a rare moment to simply be. The morning after the award ceremony, the city felt different to Imani. The streets outside her hotel window glistened with the remnants of an early rain, the air cool and fresh. She sat at the small table by the window, her laptop open but untouched, the trophy gleaming faintly in the corner of her vision. Her phone buzzed. The caller ID read Dad. She hesitated for just a second before answering. "Imani?" Richard Brooks's voice came warm but steady, a familiar anchor. "How are you feeling? Tired," she admitted. "But good. We won. Dad, I saw," he said, and she could hear the pride in his tone, even over the phone. "You stood there and told them the truth, and you didn't flinch." Imani leaned back in her chair, tucking her feet under her. "It felt like I had to, not just for me, but for everyone who has been in that kind of moment. That is exactly why I wanted to call you before the noise of everything else sets in," Richard said, "because now you have a decision to make about what comes next." She knew what he meant before he said it. "The airline?" "Yes. Leonard Drake reached out to me already," her father said. "He told me about the incident and about how you handled yourself. He also told me corporate wants to speak with you directly. You do not have to agree to that if you do not want to." Imani thought about the meeting in Munich with Annika Vogel, about the tension in the air and the careful words on both sides. "I think I do want to. But only if it is not just about them apologizing to me. I want to know what they are going to change." There was a pause on the line. "I was hoping you would say that," Richard replied, "because you are in a rare position right now. People are paying attention. You can make them see that this is not an isolated incident. It is part of something larger." "I have been thinking about that," Imani said slowly. "I do not want to make it personal revenge. I do not want Marjorie Hale to be the whole story. But I do want them to take responsibility. And I want them to put real measures in place so that no one else has to go through what I did." Her father's voice softened. "That is the difference between reacting and leading. And you have the chance to lead here." Imani found herself smiling faintly. "What would you do if you were me?" Richard chuckled. "I would make a list. Clear, specific, and impossible to dismiss. Then I would walk into that meeting knowing they need you more than you need them." She grabbed a notebook from her bag. "Help me start." They began to outline ideas together. Mandatory bias training for all crew members, a clear passenger advocacy protocol so concerns could be addressed without escalation, a commitment to track and publish incident data transparently, scholarships for underrepresented students in STEM, funded by the airline as a way to invest in the very voices they had once risked silencing. By the time they were done, the page was nearly full. "That is a good start," Richard said. "And remember, it is not about whether they will like these ideas. It is about whether they will realize they cannot afford to ignore them." Imani nodded, even though he could not see her. "Do you think they will take it seriously?" "I think they will take you seriously," he said, "because you did not come into this looking for a fight. You came here to do your work. And when they put a wall in front of you, you climbed it without losing your balance." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Imani stared at the city outside her window, the rooftops wet and glistening. "Dad," she said finally, "I think I want you there for the meeting. Not to speak for me, but just to be in the room. You will not have to ask me twice." Richard said. "Let me know when Drake sets the time. I will clear my schedule." They talked a little longer, about the forum, about the people she had met, about the potential partnerships already forming. But eventually, Richard told her to rest and enjoy at least one day before the work began again. After the call ended, Imani sat for a while, the notebook open in front of her. The list stared back at her, each bullet point a reminder that she was not finished with this journey yet. Sophia knocked and came in, followed by Ethan. They had pastries from a cafe down the street and steaming cups of coffee. "What's that?" Sophia asked, pointing to the notebook. "My list," Imani said. "For the airline?" Ethan grinned. "That is going to be one interesting meeting." Sophia leaned over to read it. "Scholarships? Transparency reports? Bias training? This is big. Imani, it needs to be." Imani replied, "If they are going to make a change, it has to mean something beyond me." They spent the rest of the morning in a quiet rhythm. Ethan answered emails from potential partners. Sophia started drafting a proposal for a grant they had discussed with a foundation representative. Imani refined the points on her list, adding details about implementation and timelines. By midday, she felt the shape of the next step settling into place. The incident on the plane had been an uninvited detour, but it had led her here to a place where she could push for something better. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the city skyline, Leonard Drake called to confirm that the airline's CEO would meet with her in Dallas the following week. "They know your father will be there," Drake said, "and they know the press will be watching. My advice: be clear, be firm, and remember that you hold the stronger hand right now." Imani thanked him and ended the call. She stood by the window for a long time, watching the last light fade. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she thought of the silver-haired woman on the plane who had told her to remember how she handled herself. And she knew she would carry that moment into the boardroom, just as she had carried it onto the stage at the forum. This was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of something larger. Dallas heat rose from the tarmac in shimmering waves as the town car rolled past the hangars toward the airline headquarters. Imani watched through the window, the skyline bright against a hard blue sky. Her satchel rested on her knees. The trophy was back at home, safe on a shelf. Today was not about celebration. Today was about terms. Richard Brooks sat beside her, composed as always, his hands folded over a leather folio. He glanced at her and smiled with his eyes. "You lead. I am here." In the lobby, cool air and quiet carpet. Her receptionist guided them to an elevator and up to a floor lined with glass walls and soft light. Waiting outside a conference room stood Leonard Drake in a dark suit, posture straight, expression steady. He shook Richard's hand, then turned to Imani. "I'm glad you came. They are ready for you. Inside, a long table faced a wall of windows. At the far end sat the CEO, a woman with silver hair cut close and a gaze that did not flinch. To her left, the head of operations. To her right, counsel. At the side of the room, a large screen glowed. Annika Vogel appeared in the video window from Munich, a slight delay in her smile. Captain Harold Vance stood near the windows, his cap tucked under his arm. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," the CEO said. "Miss Brooks, Mr. Brooks, Mr. Drake, please sit." Imani took the seat at the center of the table. She set the satchel on the floor by her feet, a choice she felt in her bones. She folded her hands on the table and met the CEO's eyes. "Before we begin," the CEO said, "I want to say I am sorry. What happened to you was unacceptable. It does not reflect the values we claim. It does not reflect the values we want to live. Imani listened. The words were careful, measured. She had heard apologies that meant very little. She decided to ask for what could not be faked. "Thank you for saying that," she said. "But I did not come for an apology. I came for commitments." Across the table, Richard was still, a quiet shoreline. Drake's jaw eased, as if a knot he had carried for days had finally decided to loosen. Imani opened her notebook. Her voice was even, clear, no anger in it, but no space for evasion either. First, mandatory training that addresses bias and de-escalation for all cabin crew and flight deck. Not a one-time session, a program with renewal every year. It needs to be developed with outside experts and with input from passengers who have experienced discrimination. Second, a passenger advocacy protocol, a named person on every flight who is trained to mediate disputes before they escalate. That person will be accountable for documenting incidents in real time. Third, transparency, a quarterly public report of complaints related to dignity and conduct, published on your website, not buried, broken down by route and outcome. Fourth, an independent review board made up of community leaders and former crew who have a record of ethical leadership. They will have the authority to review incidents and make binding recommendations. Fifth, scholarships, a fund for underrepresented students in science and engineering. Not a photo moment, a pipeline program with mentors and paid internships. I want a 5-year commitment and a named cohort every year. She stopped. The room was very quiet. Outside the windows, a plane lifted into a bright sky and vanished with a sigh. The CEO folded her hands. "You have been busy. I have been thinking about what would have helped me," Imani said, "and what might help the next person who does not have a director step on board and stop it before takeoff." Captain Vance spoke, his voice low. "Miss Brooks, as long as I have flown, I have told crew that safety is our first duty. I see now that dignity is not separate from safety. It is a part of it. You have my support." Annika's voice came through the speaker from Munich. "The liaison team can help design the reporting and communications plan. We have already drafted the first framework." Counsel cleared his throat. "We have to consider privacy. We have to consider legal exposure." Richard leaned forward for the first time, his tone quiet. "Transparency is what limits exposure. The public does not forgive secrecy. They forgive honest work toward change." The CEO looked at Imani again. The apology was gone from her expression. In its place was something like resolve. "We will commit to all 5 points," she said. "We will need time to build them. But we will begin today. I will assign owners for each item and publish the plan within 30 days. The first report will be issued at the end of the next quarter." Imani held her gaze. "I want the scholarship program named for students, not for me. No cameras, no stage. Call it the Open Doors Fellowship. Make the process simple and fair." "Agreed," the CEO said. "And one more thing. We would like you to serve as an advisor for the first year. Not a figurehead. Someone who will tell us where the plan fails." Imani felt a ripple of surprise move through her. She thought of the long nights over a prototype. She thought of the cabin lights dimming. She thought of a silver-haired woman who told her to remember how she held herself. "I will advise," she said, "on one condition. Your crews must hear the story from more voices than mine. Voices from many places, many ages. If you want a culture that changes, it must listen wider than one person." The CEO nodded once. "Done." They rose. Handshakes were offered and accepted. There were no cameras in the room, no stage remarks, only the sound of chairs sliding back on carpet, and a collective breath that felt like the end of a storm that had lasted longer than anyone wanted to admit. In the hallway, Drake let out a breath that sounded like a laugh. You did not leave them much room to wriggle. They did not need room, Imani said. They needed a standard. Outside. The heat pressed against them again, full and honest. Richard guided her toward the car and opened the door. Before she stepped in, Imani looked back at the building. She did not feel triumphant. She felt steady. That was better. On the drive home, her phone vibrated with messages. Some were from reporters. Some were from participants at the forum. One was from the silver-haired woman on the plane. I saw the news about your meeting. The message read, "Thank you for making it count." At home. The trophy caught the late light and scattered it across the wall. Imani set the satchel beside it and stood for a long moment, listening to the quiet of the house. She walked to her desk, opened a blank document, and wrote the words, Open Doors Fellowship, at the top. Below it, she started a list of what the first cohort would need. Laptops, stipends, mentors who pick up the phone on Sunday afternoons. A summer session that ends with a real presentation in a real room where real decisions get made. She paused, then added one more line. Travel support for family to attend. Let them see their kids belong in the room. The next week, the airline published the plan. The dashboard went live with the first set of numbers. Crew schedules included the new training. The advisory board met with Imani on a Tuesday morning and asked for her honest view. She gave it. They listened. Some parts were clumsy. Some parts were better than she had expected. Work had begun. That mattered. At the airport a month later, Imani walked through a familiar concourse toward another flight, this time to a coastal town where a pilot program for Luminara would launch. She wore the same satchel. The leather had new scratches now. They told a story. At the gate, a little girl tugged her mother's sleeve and pointed at Imani with wide eyes. Are you the girl with the ocean machine? The child asked. Imani laughed softly. I am one of the people working on it. The mother smiled, a little shy. Thank you, she said. Then she added, I saw the other story, too. I am glad you did not let it end there. On board, a young attendant offered to store the satchel in a safe compartment near the galley and waited for Imani to approve. Her tone was respectful. Her eyes were kind. When Imani nodded, the attendant gave a small bow of the head, as if to say, I see you. I value what you carry. The plane lifted into a clear sky. Clouds opened like paths. Imani rested her head against the seat and closed her eyes. She thought of the first flight. She thought of Munich. She thought of a conference room where a list turned into a plan. And she thought of all the names she did not know yet, the students and travelers and builders who would walk through a quieter kind of door because a storm refused to stay quiet. Her phone buzzed once more. It was a message from her mother. I heard about the fellowship. It read, The world will not always welcome you, but you will arrive anyway. Imani looked out at the bright line where sky met sky and let the words settle. She breathed in. She breathed out. She smiled. Arriving was not a single moment. It was a practice. It was the choice to keep showing up with the bag you carry and the voice you own. It was the small courage of naming what is wrong and the larger work of building what is right. The engine hum steadied into a soft, constant sound. The seatbelt sign clicked off. A child laughed 3 rows back. Somewhere up front, ice chimed against glass in a cart. The world moved. and Imani moved with it, not to be welcomed, but to arrive. Imani did not raise her voice. She raised the standard. From a silenced aisle to a standing ovation, from a tossed bag to a fellowship that opens doors. She turned one moment of harm into many moments of help. She won the prize, yes, but the greater victory was quieter. She chose not to punish a person and walk away. She chose to change a system and stay. This story asks more of us than outrage. It asks for the kind of love that protects each other's dreams and the kind of respect that does not wait for permission. It asks us to say no to small humiliations that grow into large injustices. It reminds us that prejudice is not a policy and dignity is not optional. Carry this with you the next time you board, the next time you witness, the next time you decide whether to look away. And if this journey moved you, help it move further. Like this video. Share it with someone who needs courage tonight. And subscribe to our channel for the next true story of quiet power, accountability, and hope. New flights, new voices. The door is open.